Hello everyone, I'm Ryan, and I'm here to guide you today through the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. If you use this video to fall asleep, please like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. And the silence between the trees. The thing about the Appalachian Mountains that most people don't understand is that they're old. Not old like your grandmother's house or even old like ancient ruins. Old in a way that makes human history feel like a brief, flickering moment. 300 million years of old. Old enough to have their own rules, their own logic, their own appetite. Rebecca Torres found this out on a Thursday in late October, though by the time anyone realized something was wrong, the day of the week had stopped mattering. She was 42, a high school biology teacher from Charlotte who'd spent the last decade watching her life become smaller and smaller. Divorce at 35, her daughter leaving for college last spring, an empty house that echoed with everything she'd lost. When her younger sister Maya had suggested a healing retreat in the mountains, just the two of them like when they were kids, Rebecca had agreed without much enthusiasm. It was something to do, somewhere to be that wasn't the empty house. Maya was 38 and everything Rebecca wasn't. Spontaneous, spiritual, convinced that the universe had a plan. She'd brought crystals, sage, and an entire folder of printed articles about the mystical energy of the Appalachians. She talked about ley lines and ancient spirits with the earnest intensity of someone who'd found meaning where Rebecca had only found silence. They'd rented a cabin on the western edge of the Great Smoky Mountains, far enough from civilization that the stars at night looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The first 2 days had been peaceful, almost boring. They'd hiked easy trails, cooked simple meals, sat on the porch and talked about nothing important. Rebecca had started to relax despite herself. On the third day, Maya had an idea. "There's this place," she said over breakfast, showing Rebecca her phone. They were just close enough to civilization to get a weak signal. "Look, Shadow Creek Falls. The locals say it's sacred ground, that the Cherokee used it for vision quests. It's only 5 miles from here." Rebecca studied the photos. A stunning waterfall cascaded down a cliff face, the water so clear it looked like glass. The forest around it was pristine, untouched. It looked like something from a fantasy novel. "The trail's not marked on the park map," Rebecca observed. "That's because it's not an official trail. It's more like a local secret. I found it on a hiking forum. People say it's the most spiritual place in the entire mountain range." Rebecca felt the old familiar tug of caution, the same instinct that had kept her safe and small for so long. "Maya, if it's not an official trail, we'll be careful. I've got the GPS coordinates. We'll take water, snacks, the bear spray. Come on, Becca. When's the last time you did something just because it felt right, not because it was safe?" That was how Rebecca found herself hiking through increasingly dense forest at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, following a trail that was barely a trail at all, just a suggestion of a path through the undergrowth. Maya walked ahead, practically vibrating with excitement, while Rebecca followed and tried to ignore the growing sense that they were making a mistake. The forest changed as they went deeper. The trees grew more massive, their trunks thick enough that 3 people couldn't have circled them with joined hands. The canopy above them grew denser, filtering the sunlight until everything took on a greenish, underwater quality. The sound changed too. At first there had been birdsong, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the distant sound of a stream. But gradually, subtly, those sounds faded until there was only the crunch of their footsteps on fallen leaves and the sound of their own breathing. "It's so quiet," Maya whispered, though Rebecca couldn't tell if she was awed or unsettled. Rebecca was about to respond when she saw it, a deer, standing perfectly still about 30 yards to their left, half hidden behind a massive oak. She stopped walking, held up a hand to halt Maya. They both froze, watching the animal. Except it wasn't quite right. Rebecca had seen plenty of deer in her life. North Carolina had them everywhere, but this one, something about its proportions was wrong. The legs were too long, the neck bent at an angle that didn't quite make sense, and it was completely motionless in a way that no living thing should be motionless, not even the twitch of an ear or the flick of a tail. "Maya," Rebecca said quietly, "don't look at it, just keep walking." "What? Why? It's just a deer." "It's not a deer, just trust me. Don't look at it and keep walking." For once, Maya didn't argue. They moved forward, and Rebecca felt the weight of the thing's gaze on her back like a physical pressure. She didn't look back. Some instinct older than thought told her that looking back would be a mistake she couldn't undo. They walked in silence for another 20 minutes. The trail, if it could even be called that, seemed to shift around them. Rebecca could have sworn they'd passed the same lightning-struck tree twice, though that was impossible. The GPS on Maya's phone kept spinning, unable to lock onto their location. "We should turn back," Rebecca said. "We're almost there. The coordinates say Shadow Creek Falls is just over this ridge." "Your GPS doesn't even know where we are." "It's just the tree cover. Come on, Becca. Please." Rebecca wanted to put her foot down, to insist they turn around immediately. But she'd spent so many years being the responsible one, the careful one, the one who said no. And Maya looked so hopeful, so alive in a way Rebecca envied. So she nodded and they kept walking. The ridge was steeper than it looked. They had to use their hands in places, pulling themselves up by exposed roots and rocks. Rebecca's legs burned, her breath coming hard. She was in decent shape, but this was more than she'd bargained for. When they finally crested the top and looked down the other side, she forgot about her burning muscles. There was no waterfall. The forest spread out below them, endless and unchanging. No creek, no falls, no clearing. Just trees, dense and dark and somehow wrong in a way Rebecca couldn't articulate. "That's impossible," Maya said, staring at her phone. "The coordinates say we're right on top of it. Shadow Creek Falls should be right here." "It's not, we need to go back now. Maybe we're just on the wrong side of the ridge. If we go down and circle around..." "Maya, no, something is wrong here, can't you feel it?" Maya opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Her face had gone pale. "Becca, where did the sun go?" Rebecca looked up. The canopy above them had been thick before, but now it was like looking at a ceiling of leaves so dense that no light penetrated. The forest had gone dim, twilight dark, though Rebecca's watch insisted it was only 11:30 in the morning. And then they heard it. Rebecca. Her name called in a voice that sounded almost like Maya's voice, but not quite. The same pitch, the same cadence, but with something underneath it that made her skin crawl. The voice came from deeper in the forest, down the slope they'd been about to descend. "Did you just..." Rebecca started, but Maya was already shaking her head, her eyes wide with fear. "That wasn't me." "Maya." The voice again, closer now, and this time it definitely wasn't coming from her sister. It was coming from the trees themselves, or from something moving between them. "Rebecca. Maya." Both their names now, in a voice that seemed to shift and change with each syllable, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes something that wasn't quite either. "Run," Rebecca said. They ran. The forest seemed to fight them, branches reaching out to snag their clothes, roots rising up to trip them. Rebecca lost her footing twice, caught herself on trees that left her palms sticky with sap. Behind them she could hear footsteps. Too many footsteps coming from multiple directions at once, sometimes close, sometimes far, never quite catching them, but never falling behind either. "Rebecca. Maya. Stop running." The voice was patient, almost amused. It echoed through the trees, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "We're being herded," Rebecca gasped out. "It's driving us somewhere." "Where?" Maya's face was streaked with tears and scratched from branches. "I don't know. Just keep..." Rebecca saw it too late to stop. They burst into a clearing, a perfect circle of bare earth in the middle of the forest, and in the center of the clearing stood a staircase. It rose up from nothing, 12 steps of weathered stone that led to nowhere, ending in empty air. It looked ancient, covered in moss and lichen. but it couldn't possibly be natural. Staircases didn't just appear in the middle of forests. Maya started toward it. No. Rebecca grabbed her sister's arm, yanking her back hard enough to make her stumble. Don't go near it, don't look at it. What? It's just some old stairs. Maybe someone built a tower here that fell down, or... It's not old stairs. Look at the ground around it. The earth in the clearing was undisturbed. No sign of any structure that had ever stood there. No foundations, no debris. The stairs simply existed, rising from nothing and leading nowhere. We need to go around it, Rebecca said. Don't touch it, don't look directly at it, and whatever you do, don't climb it. How do you know? I don't know. I just know. Please, Maya, trust me. They skirted the edge of the clearing, keeping as far from the staircase as possible. Rebecca kept her eyes on the tree line, refusing to look at the impossible structure. From the corner of her vision, she thought she saw something moving on the stairs, something that climbed them, and then climbed them again, caught in an endless loop, but she didn't look directly at it. Some animal part of her brain screamed that looking would be the end of something important, something she couldn't afford to lose. They were almost across the clearing when Maya stopped. Do you hear that? She whispered. Rebecca did. Music, faint but getting stronger, fiddle music, old and wild and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. It was coming from beyond the tree line, from the direction they'd been heading. It's a trap, Rebecca said. Everything here is a trap. But what if it's people? What if there's a cabin or a ranger station or in the middle of this? After everything we've seen? Maya, nothing about this is right. But Maya was already moving toward the sound, drawn by it in a way that looked almost involuntary. Rebecca grabbed for her but missed, and then she was running after her sister as Maya crashed through the undergrowth toward the source of the music. The fiddle was louder now, joined by other instruments Rebecca couldn't identify. The music was strange, beautiful but wrong, like a song played in a key that shouldn't exist. And underneath it, she could hear voices, many voices, singing wordlessly. They broke through the tree line into another clearing, this one much larger. And there, in the center, was something that made Rebecca's mind struggle to process what she was seeing. People. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all dancing in a massive circle. But they didn't look quite real. Their movements too fluid, too synchronized. Their clothes were from different eras. Some wore modern hiking gear, others dressed in styles from decades or even centuries ago. They spun and whirled, their faces blank, their eyes empty. And in the center of the dancing circle sat a figure playing a fiddle. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it wore what might have been a person once, like a suit of skin that didn't quite fit. Its fingers were too long, too many jointed, and they moved across the fiddle strings with terrible precision. It looked up at Rebecca and Maya and smiled. Its teeth went back too far. New dancers, it said, and its voice was every voice they'd heard in the forest all at once. We've been calling you for so long. Maya took a step forward, her face slack, her eyes glazed. Rebecca grabbed her arm and pulled, but it was like trying to move a statue. Maya, snap out of it. I want to dance, Maya said dreamily. I want to dance with them, forever. No, you don't. Maya, look at me. Look at me. The fiddle player's smile widened. She hears the music. She understands. The mountains are old, Rebecca Torres. We were here before your kind learned to walk upright. We were here when these peaks were young and sharp. We'll be here when they're ground to dust. And we're so very lonely. Rebecca did the only thing she could think of. She slapped Maya across the face hard. Maya blinked and Rebecca saw awareness flood back into her eyes. Becca? What? Then she saw the dancers, really saw them, and screamed. They ran again. Behind them, the music changed, became discordant and angry. The dancing figures broke from their circle and gave chase, their movement still too smooth, too perfect. Rebecca could hear them coming, could hear the fiddle shrieking like something in pain. The forest was different now, the trees closer together, the air thick and hard to breathe. Rebecca's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Maya was ahead of her now, running with the desperation of someone who'd seen something that broke the world. And then, impossibly, they saw daylight. A break in the trees, real golden sunlight streaming through, and beyond it, the sound of traffic. A road. Civilization. They burst out of the forest onto the shoulder of a highway, both of them gasping, covered in scratches and dirt and leaves. A pickup truck swerved to avoid them, horn blaring. The driver pulled over, an elderly man in a flannel shirt who looked at them with deep concern. "Jesus Christ, are you girls okay? Where did you come from?" Rebecca turned to look back at the forest. It looked normal. Just trees, autumn bright and beautiful in the afternoon sun. No darkness, no movement, no music, as if none of it had happened. "What day is it?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. The man looked confused. "Thursday, October 17th. Do you need me to call someone?" "What time?" "About 3:30. Look, I really think I should call the Rangers or—" "We went in this morning," Rebecca said numbly. "We've only been in there a few hours." "Which road is this?" Maya asked. The man told them. Rebecca's blood ran cold. They'd entered the forest near Shadow Creek, which was on the western edge of the Smokies. This highway ran along the eastern edge. They'd crossed the entire mountain range, almost 40 miles, in less than 5 hours on foot, through terrain that should have taken at least 2 days to hike. The old man drove them to the ranger station. The rangers took their statement with expressions that suggested they'd heard similar stories before, though they tried to hide it. A search team was dispatched to look for any sign of the trail they'd taken, the clearings, the staircase. They found nothing. According to the official report, Rebecca and Maya had gotten disoriented and somehow made their way through rough terrain to the other side of the mountains. Exhaustion and fear had caused shared hallucinations. But the ranger who filed the report was named Thomas Blackwood, and he'd grown up in these mountains. Before he sent them on their way, he pulled Rebecca aside. "There are rules," he said quietly, his weathered face serious. "Old rules. If someone calls your name in the woods and you don't see them, don't answer. If you find a staircase in the forest, don't climb it and don't look at it. If you hear music, walk the other way. If something looks like a deer but isn't, don't make eye contact." "Why didn't anyone tell us this before?" Rebecca asked, her voice breaking. "Because people think we're crazy old mountain folk telling scary stories. Because the truth is worse than any warning we could give. Because the mountains have been here longer than we have, and they remember things we've forgotten. Things that never stopped being hungry." He handed her a small leather pouch. "Keep this with you if you ever come back to the mountains. Iron and salt. Old protections. They don't always work, but sometimes they help." "I'm never coming back," Rebecca said. Blackwood nodded. "That's probably wise. But just in case you do, or in case the mountains decide they're not done with you, remember the rules. And if you ever see that deer again, the one that's not quite right, run. Don't think, don't question, just run." Rebecca and Maya drove back to Charlotte that night. They didn't talk about what happened. Not really. How could they? How do you explain that you danced at the edge of forever with something older than human history? How do you put words to the understanding that the world is so much stranger and more terrible than anyone admits? Maya stopped talking about spiritual energy and mystical experiences. She sold her crystals, threw away her sage. She took up knitting and started dating an accountant and never went hiking again. Rebecca went back to her empty house, back to her routine, back to her small, safe life. But sometimes, late at night, she'd wake up to the sound of fiddle music drifting through her window. She'd get up and close the window, check the locks, touch the leather pouch she now kept on her nightstand. And sometimes, when she was driving home in the evening and caught a glimpse of movement in the trees beside the road, she'd see it. A deer that wasn't quite a deer standing perfectly still, watching her with too many eyes. The mountains had let them go. But Rebecca understood, in a way that lived deeper than words, that they were being watched, that they would always be watched, that the mountains remembered them, and the things that lived in the mountains remembered them, and memory was a kind of connection that couldn't be broken. She never went back to the Appalachians, but sometimes in dreams, she climbed those stone stairs. Sometimes she danced in a circle that never ended. Sometimes she heard her sister calling her name from deep in the forest, even though Maya slept safely in her apartment across town. The mountains are patient. They've been here for 300 million years. They can wait. And somewhere in the deep, dark heart of the Smokies, a fiddle plays. The stairs still stand in their impossible clearing. The dancers still whirl in their eternal circle, and something that wears the shape of a deer watches the road, waiting for the next lost soul to wander where they shouldn't. The thing about the Appalachian Mountains is that they're old enough to have their own rules, their own logic, their own appetite. Old enough to remember what humans have forgotten, that there are places in this world that don't belong to us, that never did, and that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. The Watcher in the Holler. The photograph would later become evidence item A47 in the case file. Marcus Chen, 28, grinning broadly at the Summit Ridge trailhead, his expensive hiking boots still pristine, his North Face jacket unzipped despite the October chill. Behind him, the ancient Appalachian Mountains rose like the spine of some sleeping giant, their peaks disappearing into a fog that seemed to pulse with its own strange life. Marcus was precisely the kind of hiker the local rangers dreaded. Overeager, underprepared, and absolutely certain that his weekend YouTube tutorials and $3,000 worth of gear made him invincible. He'd arrived in Cutter's Gap, North Carolina 3 days earlier with his girlfriend Amy Rodriguez and their friends Jake Sullivan and Brittany Park, all of them city people looking for an authentic wilderness experience to post about. The locals at Maggie's Diner had tried to warn them. Old Tom Bradshaw, whose family had lived in these mountains for 9 generations, had actually stood up from his coffee when he'd overheard their plans. "Y'all heading up to Summit Ridge?" His voice carried the weight of too many search parties, too many closed case files. That's not a good trail this time of year. Fog rolls in without warning. People get turned around. Marcus had actually laughed, and Jake had elbowed him, grinning. "We've got GPS, man, and like 3 portable chargers." Tom's weathered face had hardened. "Technology don't mean much up there. Compasses spin, phones die even with full batteries, and if you hear someone call your name..." He'd paused, seeming to reconsider. "Just don't answer, even if it sounds like someone you know." Brittany had rolled her eyes. "Is this like a local legend thing? Are you messing with the tourists?" "I'm telling you what your life might depend on." Tom had placed exact change on the counter and left, the bell above the door chiming with an almost accusatory tone. Now, 6 hours into their hike, Marcus was beginning to understand that the old man hadn't been joking. The trail had started normally enough, well marked, the October sun filtering through leaves just beginning their transformation into rust and gold. Amy had been filming everything for her Instagram, her followers already commenting on her stories. So jealous, and be safe out there. Jake and Brittany kept stopping to take couple photos, their laughter echoing through the trees in a way that had initially seemed charming but now felt almost disrespectful, like shouting in a cathedral. The first sign that something was wrong came around mile marker 7. "Did we pass this tree already?" Amy had lowered her phone, frowning at a massive oak with a distinctive scar running down its trunk, a jagged lightning strike from decades past. Marcus checked his GPS app. The little blue dot showed them firmly on the trail, making steady progress toward the summit campsite. "No, we're good. Lots of trees look similar." But 20 minutes later, they passed the same tree again. The same lightning scar, the same peculiar angle of the branches. This time, no one said anything. But Marcus noticed Jake and Brittany exchange a look. The fog came next. It didn't roll in like normal mountain mist. It erupted from the ground itself, thick and white and moving with purpose, swallowing the trail ahead of them in seconds. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. "Okay, this is actually pretty cool," Brittany had said, already raising her phone to film. But her voice sounded strange, flattened, as if the fog absorbed sound itself. That's when the noises started. At first, it was just the normal sounds of the forest. Bird song, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through leaves. But gradually, Marcus realized something was off. The birds weren't singing. They were repeating the same 3 notes over and over like a skipping record. The rustling in the bushes moved parallel to them, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow they walked. And underneath it all, so faint he almost convinced himself he was imagining it, there were footsteps. Not animal footsteps. These had rhythm, purpose. They walked when the group walked. They stopped when the group stopped. Is someone following us? Amy had moved closer to Marcus. Her earlier enthusiasm completely evaporated. Jake turned around, peering into the fog. Hello? Is someone there? The footsteps stopped. The birds stopped. Everything stopped. The silence was absolute, suffocating. It pressed against Marcus's eardrums like a physical force. In all his life, he had never heard true silence before. Even in the quietest moments, there was always something. A distant car, a humming appliance, the whisper of his own breath. This was different. This was the silence of a held breath, of a predator waiting in perfect stillness for prey to move. We should keep moving, Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure why he was whispering. They walked faster now, the trail beneath their feet barely visible through the fog. Marcus kept checking his GPS, but something was wrong with it. The blue dot kept jumping. One moment they were on the trail, the next they were half a mile off course, then back again. The elevation reading flickered between 3,200 feet and 7,800 feet, which was impossible. Summit Ridge peaked at just over 4,000 feet. That's when Marcus noticed the trees. They were wrong. Not obviously wrong, not in a way he could immediately articulate, but wrong nonetheless. The spacing between them was too uniform, almost geometric. The bark patterns seemed to repeat, like wallpaper. And most disturbing of all, when he looked at them directly, they seemed normal. But in his peripheral vision, they appeared to bend, to lean, to watch. Guys? Brittany had stopped walking. She was staring at something off the trail, her face pale. What the hell is that? There, perhaps 30 feet into the forest, stood a staircase. It was made of dark metal, ornate and rust-stained, rising from the forest floor and going nowhere. 12 steps up to nothing, the top step ending in empty air. It looked like it had been there for decades, vegetation growing around its base, but the stairs themselves were eerily clean, free of leaves or debris. Don't look at it, Jake said suddenly. His voice was tight with fear. That old guy at the diner, he said something about stairs, remember? He said if we saw stairs, we should... He was just screwing with us, Marcus interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. He couldn't stop staring at the staircase. There was something hypnotic about it, something that made him want to walk over, to climb it, to see what was at the top even though he could clearly see there was nothing there. Amy grabbed his arm. Marcus, stop! He realized he'd been walking toward it. He had no memory of deciding to move, no memory of leaving the trail. His feet had simply carried him, drawn by something he couldn't name. He stumbled backward, his heart hammering. We need to go, now. Amy's voice was shaking. They ran, or at least, they tried to. The fog had grown thicker, almost solid, and the trail had vanished completely. Branches whipped at their faces. Roots seemed to reach up deliberately to trip them. The forest had become a maze, every direction looking identical, and Marcus had completely lost his sense of orientation. His phone was dead. Jake's phone was dead. Brittany's expensive satellite GPS watch showed nothing but static. They were lost, truly lost, in a way that shouldn't have been possible in the 21st century. That's when they heard Amy's voice. Marcus, over here, I found the trail. It came from deeper in the forest, off to their left. Marcus turned toward it, relief flooding through him, but Jake grabbed his shoulder. Marcus, he said quietly, Amy is standing right next to you. Marcus looked right. Amy was indeed next to him, her face white as paper, her eyes wide with terror. Marcus, Why aren't you coming? I'm over here." The voice called again. Amy's voice, her exact inflection, but she was standing right there, her mouth closed, her hand clutching Marcus's arm so tightly her nails drew blood. "Don't answer," the real Amy whispered. "Don't answer it. Don't look at it. Don't—" "Marcus, please, I'm scared. There's something wrong with me. I can't move. I need help." The fake Amy's voice was desperate now, pleading, and it took every ounce of Marcus's willpower not to respond. Then they heard Jake's voice. "Brittany, I'm hurt. I fell. Please, I need help." But Jake was standing with them, his arm around Brittany, both of them frozen in terror. The voices multiplied. Soon the forest was full of them, each perfectly mimicking one of the group, calling out from different directions. Some were injured, some were lost, some were angry. One was laughing, a high, manic sound that went on far too long. "We stay together," Marcus managed to say. "We don't split up, we don't answer. We just pick a direction and walk." They walked for what felt like hours. The fog never lifted. The voices followed them, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always perfectly mimicking their own voices back to them. Marcus tried to keep track of time, but his watch had stopped at exactly 3:47 p.m., and no matter how long they walked, the light never changed. It remained the same perpetual twilight, neither brightening nor darkening. It was Brittany who disappeared first. One moment she was there, her hand in Jake's, her breathing ragged from exertion and fear. The next moment Jake was holding nothing but air, no sound, no scream, no rustle of movement. She simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Jake's scream was primal, animalistic. He spun in circles, calling her name, violating the one rule they'd desperately been following. "Brittany, Brittany, where are you?" "I'm right here, baby." Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere surrounding them. "Why are you yelling? I'm right here." But she wasn't. There was only the three of them now, and the forest, and the watching. Because something was watching them. Marcus could feel it, had felt it since they entered the fog. It was in the trees, in the spaces between the trees, in the fog itself. It observed with an intelligence that was vast and patient and utterly alien. They were insects under glass, specimens in a collection, and the collector was taking its time deciding what to do with them. They ran. Direction no longer mattered. Staying on a trail no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except movement, except the animal need to flee. Branches tore at their clothing and skin. Marcus lost his expensive jacket to a thorn bush, felt the cold bite through his t-shirt. Didn't care. Jake disappeared next. One moment his footsteps were pounding beside them. The next, only silence. Marcus and Amy didn't stop running, didn't look back. They couldn't. To stop was to join the disappeared, to become another name on the list of those the mountain had claimed. Marcus's lungs burned, his legs screamed. Amy was making small whimpering sounds with each breath. But she kept moving, kept running. The forest blurred around them, an endless repetition of trees and fog and the terrible certainty that something was behind them, something that breathed without sound and moved without rustling leaves. Then Amy was gone. Marcus stumbled to a stop, gasping. He was alone, completely, utterly alone. The fog pressed close and the silence was back. That awful, suffocating silence. He turned in a slow circle, and that's when he saw it. The staircase again. The same one, or perhaps a different one. It stood perhaps 10 feet away, those ornate metal steps leading to nothing. But now there was something on the steps. Amy's backpack. Neatly placed on the 5th step, zippers all closed, not a strap out of place. Marcus approached slowly, his mind screaming at him to run, his body moving of its own accord. When he was close enough, he could see Jake's camera on the 7th step, Brittany's distinctive purple water bottle on the 9th, and on the very top step, the one that ended in empty air, a piece of paper. Marcus didn't remember climbing. One moment he was at the base of the stairs, and the next he was reaching for the paper, his hand extending into that impossible space where the 12th step should have led to nothing but air. His fingers closed around the paper. It was a photograph. The four of them, Marcus and Amy and Jake and Brittany, standing at the base of these very stairs, smiling for the camera. But Marcus had no memory of this photo being taken. They had never approached the stairs, had run from them, had... He looked closer. Behind them in the photo, barely visible in the fog, were shapes. Tall, impossibly thin shapes with too many joints. Their limbs bent at angles that hurt to look at. They stood among the trees, perfectly still. And in the photograph their attention was fixed on the four hikers with what could only be described as hunger. Marcus turned slowly. The fog had lifted just a little, just enough to see. They were all around him now, those shapes. Those not quite human things that wore the forest like a mask. They stood between the trees, perfectly still, watching with eyes that reflected no light. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence swallowed it, swallowed him, and the last thing Marcus Chen thought before the darkness took him was that the old man had been right. The mountains kept their secrets, and now he was one of them. The search party found Marcus's phone 3 days later, precisely where the GPS last pinged, right on the main trail, less than a quarter mile from the summit campsite. The battery was at 87%. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading off the trail, nothing to indicate where he and his friends had gone. His phone contained 247 photos from that day. Most were the standard hiking shots, trail markers, scenic overlooks, selfies. But the last 15 photographs showed things that the search and rescue coordinator, a veteran of 30 years in these mountains, refused to describe in his official report. He would only say that the photos showed the forest, trees, and fog, nothing more. When pressed, he added that sometimes cameras captured things the human eye wasn't meant to see. He recommended the photos be sealed and never released to the families. That recommendation was ignored. Amy Rodriguez's mother insisted on seeing every image from that day, hoping for some clue about what happened to her daughter. The photos were delivered to her on a Friday afternoon. On Saturday morning, she called the ranger station. She was calm, eerily calm, and she spoke in a voice that sounded nothing like her own. She said she understood now. She said she could see them in the photos, standing behind her daughter, standing behind all of them. She said they were beautiful in their way, in the way that deep ocean creatures were beautiful, ancient and strange, and utterly inhuman. She said she was going up to Summit Ridge. She said they had called to her, and she needed to answer. They found her car at the trailhead on Sunday. The doors were locked, her purse and phone still inside. There was a note on the dashboard, written in her precise handwriting. "Don't look for me. I'm going home." She was never seen again. Tom Bradshaw heard about it at Maggie's diner, the same stool, the same coffee, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. The mountain had fed, and it would be quiet for a while now, satisfied. "Damn fools," he muttered into his coffee. "Every year, damn fools." The waitress, Maggie herself, set a fresh pot down and didn't argue. She'd grown up in these mountains too. She knew. Outside, October rain began to fall, washing away footprints, erasing evidence, returning the forest to its pristine, unmarked state. By the time the rain stopped, there would be nothing to indicate anyone had ever walked those trails. The mountain would be innocent again, waiting, always waiting. Because there would be more, there were always more. More hikers with expensive gear and no respect. More YouTubers chasing content. More couples seeking adventure. More people who thought themselves immune to the old rules, the old warnings. The stairs would wait for them, patient and eternal. The voices would call to them in their own words. The fog would rise when the time was right, and somewhere deep in the forest, in places where the trees grew too close together and the compass spun wild, Marcus and Amy and Jake and Brittany stood among the watching things. They stood perfectly still, their eyes reflecting no light, their limbs bent at angles that hurt to look at. They were home now. They were part of the mountain. They were the secret the mountain kept. And when the next group of hikers came, when the next set of foolish tourists ventured too deep and stayed too long, they would be there in the fog, calling out in voices that were almost but not quite human. "Help me. I'm lost. Over here. I found the trail. Please, I'm hurt. I need help." The mountain would feed again. It always did. In Cutter's Gap, the population sign was quietly updated. 4 fewer people. The census adjusted. Life went on. The diner served coffee, the general store sold supplies, and the locals learned not to look too closely at the missing persons board in the ranger station. 37 names in the last decade alone. 37 people who had ignored the warnings, laughed at the legends, trusted their technology over ancient wisdom. The Appalachian Mountains are among the oldest in the world, worn down by time into something that looks gentle, looks inviting. But age brings wisdom, and wisdom brings patience, and patience is the greatest weapon of all. The mountains could wait. They had waited for millions of years. They would wait for millions more. And sooner or later, someone would always come. Someone would always climb those stairs. Someone would always answer when they heard their name called in the fog. The mountain would make sure of it. Because that's what the mountain did. That's what it had always done. It called. It waited. It took. And it never, ever gave back.